I'd like to call to order the Monday, May 8th, 2017 regularly scheduled meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Kruger?
Present.
Commissioner Graham, looks like he's not in yet. Commissioner Schwartzbacher?
Here.
Chair Rudnicki?
Here.
Commissioner Bolt?
Here.
Commissioner Corbett?
Present.
Commissioner Breidenbach?
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Here.
And our Chair Pro Tem Stallman is not in tonight. And Commissioner Graham is present.
Oh. So let the record show he's 30 seconds late here, as usual.
Over a minute.
So we do have a quorum here. Let's see, next item is the approval of the agenda. You've got the agenda sent to you. Are there any corrections, changes? Seeing none, we'll move on to minutes to be approved. You got the gist of the minutes from the April 26, 2017 regular meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
We have a second?
I second it.
I think John's first. Any discussion? We need to vote.
I'm sorry, you need a motion on the table? Motion on the floor to vote
We
on?
did. Robin? Okay. All right. Oop. Mr. Bolt was absent.
I was absent.
You were absent? Okay. So we have 4 yeses. And Lynn was gone last time as well, so
All right, 4-0, and the motion carries.
thank you. Next item is public comment for general business and non-agenda related items. Public comment is the opportunity for anyone to express opinions or ask questions on items that are not part of the public hearing. Immediate response should not be expected. Anyone who would like to speak during the public comment, please sign in. We do have a sign-in sheet here. We expect comments to be civil. You have 3 minutes to speak. The recording secretary will hold up a yellow card to indicate 30 seconds remaining, and will hold up a red card to indicate the time is up. When your name is called, please come up to the podium, speak directly into the microphone, please. Tough acoustics in this room. Provide your name and address or your district number. First up, we have Matthew Wilson.
Yeah, my name is Matthew Wilson. I live at 5627 South Loudoun Street, and I'm here regarding the Loudoun Heights Historic District Design Guidelines. I just wanted to say thank you for the editor or writer who worked on the document and improved it from where it was the last time. However, I think we had an issue when I first saw it. The final draft that I saw, dated May 8th, 2017, had page numbers at the top and a lot of formatting problems, and that's what went out to the neighborhood. And it's a rainy, haily night, and we've been working on this for 13 years, so I'm sorry there's not more neighbors here. I had a lot of comments on this, but the final draft that I see here, that's all cleaned up with the page numbers and all the formatting is correct and stuff. I take it this is the final one, and so all the errors and problems that I saw in that one, and I'm sure that the neighbors saw, have been corrected. It looks beautiful. Thank you so much for getting it done. It's been a true labor of love by the neighborhood, and I'm sure by Dennis after this many years. And I want to thank everybody who's been involved on the city staff and you all. I think finally it's a good document that's going to be really helpful to the neighborhood and the homeowners now and in the future. And I hope the city of Littleton will be able to look at the Loudoun Heights Historic District with pride on into the future. That's all I have to say. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. Dan Flynn?
Oh, thanks. Dan Flynn, District 2, live on Broadway. I'd like to request that the commission do the courtesy of allowing the neighborhood that I'm in to discuss comprehensive planning as has occurred for, I assume, all of your neighborhoods. Some of you may be aware that there is one section of the city that was not in the comprehensive plan. The map was later changed, as many of you know. It was not in the plan because it had never been discussed. The neighborhood had never come to agreement on how it should be addressed, and therefore it wasn't in the comprehensive plan. During the comprehensive planning for Comp 2030, it was again not discussed, despite the neighbors coming to every meeting to ask that we discuss it. It was refused. when they came to you to change the borders on the map, to simply say, oh yeah, now it is comprehensively planned, which you did. I again came before you and asked that the neighbors be allowed to comment on that we have concerns about the land use there, and it has not been discussed. Finally, when you had a chance for a joint meeting with City Council to talk about planning priorities, it was passed over, saying that there was no urgency there, that there was no real need to discuss it. It was not discussed. The section of land that I'm talking about is the very same parcel that's in front of you now for redevelopment. They're asking you to look at it and make decisions having never comprehensively planned it, having never received input from the neighbors. And besides that, they're asking you to approve a clearly B3 use in a B2 area. The neighborhood is already hurting. We need B2 businesses. We've lost an ice cream parlor, a bowling alley, a tool rental, a garden patio shop, 2 restaurants, all lost to auto storage because that has never been comprehensively planned. And so I'm only asking that you please delay any consideration of submittals in that area, and please ask council to finally bring this forward and have Broadway Corridor discuss. It's supposed to be B2 businesses. It is being swallowed up by B3 uses, and I think it's very concerning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Pam Chadbourne, please.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1, a block and a half from here. First off, I wasn't going to talk about this, but what Dan said is entirely true. I grew up on Broadway. You can tell that was a while ago, decades. My father carried around a petition in the neighborhood because he asked, when the auto places started to take the farms and houses that were on the east side of Broadway, he asked that Broadway be curved to allow a buffer space from the houses on the west side so that the businesses would have Broadway access and the houses would have a buffer street. There was a dentist on the block. He didn't want a sign because he thought, gee, his clients would have to drive a little further. The council did not approve that bypass. And we have the situation on Broadway today where there's a horrific 30-home stretch where houses are on a street that is unlivable. The noise, the hazard from the traffic, the pollution, the air pollution, and the use across the street, the lights, they do not fit. Dan is entirely right. So my topic was, Commission, you have business to do. And some of those are the Bellevue corridor and the Broadway corridor. And this seems to me obvious. Every time people come to talk to you, we talk about traffic. Every time. And what are you doing about it? Nothing. Except you approve every large or higher density infill that comes before you that does not comply with our codes, our neighborhood plans, or our comp plan. You make it worse. Commission, I think you are failing the city and you are failing us, the citizens, and I said this last week and I've said it several times, because you're not reading our documents that limit your power and guide what you do. In fact, form what you're supposed to do. So last week, 5 folks disregarded what Commissioner Swartzbrocker brought up. Violations, huge ones, for a major infill development that changes the nature of Curtis Street fundamentally. And you completely disregarded those, the folks who voted for that. That should have been responded to. Notice the staff report did not include that either. The staff reports have always been deficient and defective. Every time I've seen them for years, they do not include everything that should be included. You can't cherry pick compliance. So, Commission, you have things to do. Some of them are the corridor plans and the neighborhood plans. Please get to work and do something that reflects our needs, not yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone that hasn't signed up that wishes to speak in front of the Planning Commission? Seeing no rush to the rostrum, we'll move on to the general business of this evening. We have one general business item, PC Resolution 06-2017, a resolution adopting design guidelines for the Loudoun Heights Historic Districts. Commissioners, you have, of course, all your attachments that we got very early last week, which was nice for a change. Can we have a staff presentation? And Dennis's staff. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I'm Dennis Swain. Commissioners, nice to see you all tonight.
Need to speak in front of the mic. Speak closer to the mic.
I shall, thank you.
Thank
Yes. The proposal before you is to formally adopt design guidelines for the Loudoun Heights Historic District. As you know, the authority of the, there we go. The authority says the Historical Preservation Board will make recommendations to the Planning Commission on design guidelines. So they're the ones that actually do for historic preservation design guidelines, the ones that actually do the study sessions, do most of the work with the consultants. But the authority for actually adopting those belongs to the Planning Board, Planning Commission. And so the Historical Preservation Board has held a public hearing and made a recommendation, a unanimous recommendation to adopt the design guidelines. As they were changed after the public hearing that they had some additional comments from the public and they wanted those included. So the adoption was at March 20th, 2017. They held a public hearing. And by resolution 03-2016, they recommended the Planning Commission adopt the Loudoun Heights Historic District as amended by the board. Design guidelines, and you all know what design guidelines are and you use design guidelines. They're used to identify, establish, and maintain a desired character. And they're used by property owners, by architects, by city staff, by city boards, elected officials in both the design and the review of proposed changes to the exterior of property. We don't deal with the interior of properties, it's only the exterior. With historic properties and districts, the mechanism for applying design guidelines is the Certificate of Historic Appropriateness, or the COA. And COAs are required if you're in a historic district or if you had a landmark property for exterior demolition, new construction, the addition or modification of architectural features, the demolition of existing accessory structures or construction of new accessory structures, so garages, sheds, changes in the exterior of accessory structures to include garages, greenhouses, covered or closed decks, worker storage shed and similar structures, and the addition or alteration of swimming pools, hot tubs, all kinds of exterior HVAC and antennas and satellite dishes and anything that's mechanical that can be seen from the public street. That tends to be the focus of design guidelines too, is what can you see from the public right-of-way? If we put less attention on the backyards, on the backs of houses, on the sides of houses if it's not visible, but it's really how to maintain the character of that district or that landmark as it's seen by the public, and still allowing change, evolution of those properties so that they are viable properties, that they can be utilized, and they evolve with changing needs and changing potentials. The district itself, the Loudoun Historic District, is the oldest historic district in the city. It was actually a petition of the neighbors put together, brought to city council, said we need this protection. And they have been around, still the only residential historic district that is just a Littleton Historic District. We have the downtown, the Main Street Historic District, which is primarily commercial. And then we also have the Arapahoe Hills Historic District, but that's a national historic district rather than local. And the difference is we do not do COA reviews. We do not do reviews of any of the properties in the national, only in the local districts and with local landmarks. The district has a concentration of arts and crafts houses, and it's a wonderful concentration of houses built largely by a single builder, which is Charles Loudoun. And the elements of that are broad porches, clipped roofs, gable roofs, overhanging eaves, exposed rafters. And they've got something unique in Loudoun, which is they have a stucco, which is a pebble stucco, and every pebble on each house has its own unique pebble. And so repairing those has been a bit of a bear for the homeowners in terms of how do you find those pebbles, how do you stock those pebbles, and how do you actually get that repaired. Funding for the guidelines, the neighbors have been asking for guidelines since district was put in place. And we had not had staff time to do that. We'd not been able to get on our workload. And we finally had a great opportunity with a grant from the state. They've been very gracious in terms of giving us money. We were able to hire 2 consultants that did a great job, not only working with us, but also working with the neighbors, looking at what other guidelines the city had and what our needs were. And it's been a good process from that standpoint, as Matt said. The format was very responsive to the neighbors. The consultants did a great job of going out and talking to the neighbors and saying, okay, what are your issues here? What have you seen over the years in terms of what's working for you, what's not working for you, what do you need guidance on? And the neighbors were looking at some things that were above and beyond what are typically seen in design guidelines. And so we've included those as voluntary guidelines. And so we do have those, and I think it's a really unique process, I think, of working with them, and it's exactly what should be done, and they were absolutely right. The consultants met with them and said, what issues do you have with the maintenance and materials of your house? And we got great responses in terms of here's what we need. The pebble dash maintenance and repair is exceedingly difficult. Wood deterioration, how do you do that? The neighbors did have Historic Denver come out a few years ago and did a workshop on window repair on historic wood windows. And so they've been very, very conscientious. It's a great group of neighbors. They love their houses. They love the neighborhood, and they've done a great job of maintaining their houses. One thing, for example, is voluntary guidelines is paint. We don't deal with color. We don't deal with paint necessarily. We only deal with paint if it's painting something that's never been painted before. If brick is being painted, then design review comes into place. But colors are nothing we deal with. So, but the neighbors wanted to see what were the colors that were kind of most common at that point. So the consultants put colors in. They put in other things too that really are voluntary. And we've tried to lead each section that has voluntary guidelines with a statement that these are voluntary, these are not part of the purview of the city to review. The introduction, this is a table of contents, and I think it's a good indication of what's in these. They did a great job of talking about the background for the project itself, the benefit of living in the district, the location boundaries of the district. What are design guidelines? Just answering that question. So the thought is, this is not just for the people who are there and know what the design guidelines are and what the district is. This is a tool that they can use for realtors who are marketing properties for them. This is for new residents who move in. This is for contractors who need direction. It's for our inspectors, and we've met with our inspectors a couple times. We'll meet with them more after, if the board commission decides to adopt them. We'll make sure that they're very familiar with them. They've been great with their input as well. And we've talked about what's the procedure, and then the historic context for the district. We've talked about what are the character defining features for this neighborhood. And because so many of them were built about the same time, and so many of them were built by the same contractor, there's a lot of similarity in these, so you can really find that kind of continuity with the porches and the windows and the landscaping. And so again, we get into landscaping, which is not within the purview for design review, but the neighbors wanted to say, what does this mean? And I think the consultants did a great job of saying, here are the defining characteristics of your front yard, so you don't have fences, you don't have hedges, you don't break up that front yard, so you really have that full view down the street. And the backyards tend to be the same way. So it's been an important thing as we go through. And then they did some tips, here are some concerns, and they provided some references in terms of resources that are available, primarily looking at what's available from the Department of the Interior and National Park Service, some great materials for historic preservation. So, and then the terminology, which I think was critical too, because it's important not only to the homeowners, but I think everyone is dealing with, so we're all talking about the same elements as we go through. And not all of us are familiar with what Art and Crafts elements are, so it's been very helpful to have that. Review and adoption process. Historical Preservation Board started off with study sessions. They had the first session, they invited the consultants and the neighbors, and they were all introduced to one another at the same time at the first meeting. And then the consultants then went out and met with the neighbors and the neighbors were wonderful in terms of organizing and getting comments. We had the initial drafts posted on littletonplans.org. The Neighbors and Planning Commission had, you may remember, a joint study session October 2016, or excuse me, 11/14. The Neighbors and PC got together in October, and then you guys had a study session in November. And right after that, HPP had their first public hearing. At that first public hearing, they said, we're going to see a more final document before we actually make a recommendation on this. So take it back and make those edits that we'd really like to see. Here's some comments. We did that. We went back to the public hearing. It was continued to January, and at that point, we felt like we needed more time. The workload for us was such that we couldn't get to everything we wanted to get to, so we then rescheduled for March. They had a public hearing in March, and then we went back and made some additional changes to it. And as Matt said, we had, Kelly Nari did a great job of editing for us, which was wonderful, and so she did her edits, and we still have some more to go. And so we'll see, but Robin found some more, and I think you all probably will have seen things, and we've got some additional comments, I think, that Kelly had that we haven't gotten there yet in terms of changing page numbers, that kind of stuff. So we will make those, again, the kind of formatting change. We wouldn't make any substantive changes after you adopt it, but we will go ahead and make some formatting changes if you see others, or if you see additional substantive stuff you'd like to have changed as well, we can do that. So, it's PC Resolution 1321 to 2017. And again, that's the authority for it. And here are the design guidelines, the final draft. As Matt said, there have been a couple versions of this final draft. Oops. Sorry. Okay, and I guess that's it, actually. I was thinking there was more in there, but that's it. So that's probably enough. If you had a chance to look through these, I'd be very open to questions, comments, your thoughts in terms of the design guidelines. And I know the neighbors who are here might want to comment as well. So, and again, our appreciation and thanks to the neighbors, to our consultants, to the state for the funding, and to the Planning Commission and City Council for all sponsoring this and being supportive. So.
Thank you. Questions for Dennis? We'll start down at this end. John?
I had one question on the replacement of glazing. I noticed that in the back of the document there was some National Park Service guidelines on restoration of historic wooden frame windows. Mm-hmm. But in the document itself, it just said to replace glazing with traditional methods. I was wondering if that National Park Service document, which I couldn't get to pull up on the internet for some reason, covered replacing single glazing with double glazing.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. As you know, windows are a huge issue for historic preservation because of that, because of the thought that they're not as energy efficient. And we actually have had a couple of cases coming through the board lately, replacing windows or wanting to replace windows or repair windows. And what we've done typically is go back to those kind of standards and go back to and talk to people who are real experts on these, because it's a tough thing to think which windows can be repaired, which need to be. Typically on the single versus double pane, the thought is put storm windows on rather than change, because putting a double pane in changes the profile significantly enough that it makes a difference in terms of how the window looks from the exterior and interior both. And so either exterior storm windows or interior storm windows, and those tend to be approved as well. So one of the neighbors in Loughton, for example, just exceedingly careful with what he's doing. He had wood storm windows built for his house, and it's not as convenient perhaps as the newer ones, but they work exceedingly well, and most of the heat is not going out through the windows, as we know. It goes out through the ceiling and the crawl space, and so there are other places it's going out, the doors. So the windows are an issue, but they typically recommend not replacing the double pane or single pane with double.
Okay, very good. That answers my question. I did see the recommendation for using storm windows.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll make sure, it's called out enough. That's a good thought.
Good. Thank you. I do think it's a nice document. It's user-friendly. I also especially like the historical elements that are in there. I think it brings it to life a little bit and makes it more user-friendly, which is important to me. I was most concerned on the process section and reading about all the different steps and happen, and I appreciate the gentleman speaking on behalf of neighbors early on, but will we get to hear from other neighbors? Because I do want to make sure that.
Yes, there'll be a public comment after I finish.
No, we do not have,
No, there's no
I'm
public
sorry, it's the
comment.
general business, we do not, I'm sorry, that's correct, sorry.
any comment would be made during
Right.
the public comment that
Okay.
already went through.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so just knowing that this gentleman speaking on behalf of the neighbors, that they are supportive of this document is good to me, and I don't know if he's allowed to say anything else, if we can address him and.
No?
But we've already had it.
Or Jocelyn, what do you think?
Generally, we're bringing it forward on behalf of the neighborhood, and structure of the process is it's a general business item. So if people had comment, they provided you comment ahead of time. I mean, it's up to, I feel we've done a pretty good job, and I believe most of the neighbors would also say that. I guess we didn't think about bringing forward some of the conversations we've had in the past through this entire process, but certainly it's been with all of the property owners, and they've been generally supportive of the
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, typically I would say that, they've been, wanting this since day one. And so, and they were so involved with this, I think they're pretty happy with it. Perhaps we've not gone as far, with some of the voluntary information as they might like. And that's something that we hope to provide more on a one-to-one basis and kind of more informally as we go forward. But typically, I think they've reviewed the design guidelines and are very comfortable with them. So it's what we heard, particularly at the Historical Preservation Board when they had their public hearing.
Well, let's throw this out to the commission. Normally, we only allow public comment for general business beforehand, which is what we've already been through, not during general business. So does anybody have a problem with that?
Given the nature of this subject matter and given the size of this room, I feel comfortable leaving it to chair's discretion on whether there are additional comments.
Anybody? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I feel that this is the applicant. I mean, he's part of the initial process.
Not the applicant, but he is part of the
But,
process, yes.
yeah, so that would be staff's additional follow-up. So at your discretion, I agree with Commissioner Graham if you feel you want to.
I agree that it should, if you decide it's all right for a quick
entertain
question, then
more
that's fine.
comments, because it is guidelines that will be regulating the neighbor and the property owners.
Any other comment? Okay, this is not to set a precedence, but we'll allow you a quick question, but you need to come back and speak in front of the microphone, but a quick comment. Speaking.
Sure. Yes,
Matthew Wilson, 5627 South Loudon Street. I just want to make sure, because now I'm confused, because what you're showing on screen was sent to the neighbors, and it has pagination and formatting problems and a lot of issues with it. And what you're presenting that's hard copy up there is a clean copy that's
That is the
done
document
well.
we reviewed.
This is the copy, because the one you're showing there, okay, just want to make sure, because I was like, if it's this one, then we got a lot of problems
Yes.
with it. But if it's this one, and they're both dated and say the exact same thing, so you guys are going to review and approve the one that looks beautiful, right?
Yes.
Not this one.
Yeah, we chucked out the
Not
ugly
the one that's
copy.
showing on screen with page numbers on the top and formatting problems throughout and everything.
We got the right copy.
We got the right copy. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Dennis, you're back up.
Okay. So I just have, I have two more questions then. One is,
Excuse me. Because we open the floor to public comment, all other interested members of the public who want to speak as to this proceeding shall have the opportunity to do so now.
Oh.
Before we continue discussion on the matter.
I'm sorry, I'm not knowing what you're asking.
to open it up for
Because
other
we
comment on this issue.
Once we've opened it up, we can open it up further?
We have to open up for everyone because you decided to open up for public comment. Everyone who's in the crowd who's interested in speaking on this matter only should now be allowed the opportunity to do so before continuing discussion.
Okay, we'll continue with our questioning, and if somebody raises their hand, we'll allow them a brief question.
No, I would not. I mean, the public has to be allowed to comment.
Public has a right to, that's what I'm saying.
right now.
Let's do it now.
Right now?
Ask them now.
Because,
Offer the floor.
because the person who just spoke,
I don't
he's
see
not-
where, okay, I don't see
he's not
where.
the applicant, he's a member of the public, therefore, all other members of the public must be allowed the opportunity to speak.
Are there any other questions from anyone in the audience? Seeing none, we'll move on with questions for staff.
Sorry, I just have to maintain decorum.
It seemed to me it didn't matter what the sequence is for waiting for the public or waiting for commissioner questions. Go ahead.
Okay.
Well, the neighbor input in this is important to me, and I'm glad to hear that Matthew, apparently speaking on behalf of his neighbors, was supportive of the process and is supportive of the document, provided that we are reviewing the correct document. So when it comes to conveyance, what is the city's process, or what is the requirement that these guidelines are disclosed to a prospective buyer and that they are conveyed with the property?
Yeah,
or-
there's nothing that runs with the property. It's nothing like it's filed with the county or anything else, so it doesn't show up that way. It really is, they know that they're in a historic district, and that's the key, is that does run with the property, and so that does show up in the title. The design guidelines themselves do not, and that takes a little due diligence on the part of the purchaser or the realtor to know that they do exist. But once they know they're in a historic district, most people know that there's some kind of a process and some kind of guidelines that they'll need to look at. So we've not had too much trouble with that when it's once they know that, and it is something that is found in the title search.
So it would be found in a title search?
Not the guidelines, but the fact they're in the district.
That is-
So, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I would also note that in the city, in our internal database where we list all the properties within the city boundaries, we will flag it so that when it comes up for someone wanting to do something at that location, if they call the city, then we will be able to say, hey, you are also in or subject to these guidelines.
And then you could provide them a copy?
Correct. Yes,
If it
if they
wasn't
don't
conveyed.
have that.
They don't have it, and
Yeah.
they're online and have been, and will continue to be. All of our design guidelines are, so including the voluntary ones. So,
Okay. And then just my last question is sort of related to Matthew's concern. So this one says final draft. And are we approving tonight a final draft or a final document? The term draft.
It's a final document once you approve it. If you have additional changes to it, that's allowing you to have more changes if you wanted.
Okay.
So at that point, it becomes a final document. That draft comes off, and it's adopted as of this date. So
Okay.
it'll go on the title.
And you had suggested that this could be a living and evolving document, that if people find edits and changes later. So how is version control maintained, and where does one get the latest current approved version? And if there are changes, is there an approval process for changes?
If we were to make changes, we'd have to come back through HPP and through the Planning Commission both to make those amendments. And then those would be the ones we would post online and the ones we would distribute. So
Okay, so this document is available online
This is
after
the
it's
one's on-
approved?
yeah,
It's
exactly.
easy to find on
Right.
Littleton plans?
Yes,
Okay.
sure is. Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
I have no questions.
Robin?
I have questions.
Okay.
Actually, well, just to start, I really appreciate the work you've done and how you've put it together so it's like in one package, so if someone's trying to come, they don't have to search for all kinds of different documents. It's all together. That's really helpful, and like we were saying about the history and what the neighbors think, and I can only imagine if you're going to be new into the neighborhood, how beneficial this would be have right up front with all that. So thanks for doing that.
Absolutely. It's been great. We've had actually new neighbors move in during the process, and they were very anxious to see them and work with them, and they've been very open to it. It's been great. So, yeah.
So I have a clarifying question first. Going through what you did with the citywide plan, the neighborhood plan, and all the zoning, I had one question, and this was on page 3 of your staff communications.
Okay.
Under the citywide plan, it's the very bottom. It's the last bullet.
Okay, good.
So striving for sustainability, economic, environmental, and social decisions. I think I know what you mean by that, but how does this fit in with that?
Sure. Typically, I think when historic preservation is thinking about historic preservation and what are the benefits, one of the top ones is sustainability. The most sustainable form of housing is existing housing. You can repair your house, you can expand your house, But, that, rather than doing all new construction, using existing structure is seen as exceedingly sustainable. And so that's it. And I think, we've got questions about energy efficiency and other things, but, that comes into play. And the thought is that those can be, achieved pretty easily, I think, with historic properties. So that's where it comes into play. And as well as economic sustainability, just because it's less expensive. And so it certainly saves the city money, saves the developers money, everybody, and property owners as well, just hanging on to what they've got.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so going into the actual plan itself, looking on page 2, which is the contents. When I'm looking at it, because it's a long table of contents and it all runs together, I don't know if there's space available, but it seems like visually it might be easier if you had a space between each section.
Okay.
Just so your eyes can go to those sections a little easier.
Okay, good. And actually, I'm sorry, just a comment. We started off with a very simple table of contents, and the neighbors asked us to put in the details, and they were absolutely right. I think it's very helpful to have each of these subsections in so you can actually find exactly what you're looking for. But it does crowd the page, so yeah, I think we can fit that in. So it's already a very small font, but I think it'll work. So.
If it does.
Okay.
It helps with communicating. The other idea was when you're looking at other of our design standards and guidelines and that sort of stuff, they actually give a Roman numeral to each of the sections. So instead of saying, trying to figure out what section you're at, you can say, section 3, section 2, section 4. I'd be curious if we could consider throwing a Roman numeral in front of each of the sections just for ease of communication.
Sure, I love Roman numerals, so I can do that.
We all love Roman numbers.
Okay.
And on page 10, it talks about standards for rehabilitation.
Okay.
It says how the guidelines are based on the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation. I just wanted to, this is just a clarifying comment, that means that they are consistent with them so that if they can still get the tax credits and stuff if they do this sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And before we had design guidelines for the neighborhood, which is now, typically what we do is we fall back on those standards from the federal government. They're very broad, and so, but they give the overall parameters of what you're looking at, and pretty useful. This gives us a lot more detail, but absolutely, these are consistent with that. Nothing's inconsistent with it, so, okay.
And then on page 12, under COA requirements, just at the very bottom, it talks about wing generators. So I hadn't heard of those, so I looked them online, and well, there they are. What I'm curious, if we're talking about wing generators, should we consider wind generators also?
Oh, it's supposed to be wind, actually. That is supposed to, that's a typo, I think. Sorry.
There are wind generators.
Oh, there are?
There are. They're more
well,
efficient.
maybe I will check with the consultants and see what, I'll check with our language.
All the same, they're similar, but they are distinctly.
What is a wing generator?
So it uses like an airplane foil.
Okay.
You know how the airplane goes like this? So they'll use that, and then they can do them in different directions, so it can actually get more of the wind and produce more energy.
I've been assuming that was a typo, but that may be. I will check and see. Good, thank you. Okay.
And the last thing goes to where you get into the actual design guidelines, page 31 and on. So you know how you have the different sections where you have the defining features and the do's and the don'ts.
Right.
So again, I'm thinking if you're trying to communicate these with someone, it can be hard to have bullets. You say bullet number 3 from the top, bullet number 4 from the bottom. What about the possibility of numbering them so you can say number 4 under the do's or number 2 under the don'ts?
Okay, absolutely.
And also with the defining characters, just for ease of communication.
Definitely can do that. Okay, good.
And that was it.
Okay, good. And is there anyone who doesn't agree with any of Robin's comments? If not, I'll look at incorporating those if we have the motion that agrees with that.
Probably make that part of the motion. Okay.
Okay.
Andrew?
My primary comment is just more an intent, and it's way to go to the neighborhood. Good job. We up here as a planning board on an annual basis or biannual basis make decisions on what priority we're going to go through various neighborhoods, various corridors, et cetera. And I keep thinking, gee, it would be a lot easier if the people who lived in that neighborhood would step up and make some decisions and present them to us, because it facilitates our dialogue very well. And so to you all, you made it really easy for us to support you. And I would encourage the city to encourage more of the neighborhoods to take that more localized effort to try to promote this. We go at our own pace. Sometimes it's a rabbit's pace, sometimes it's a turtle's pace. But at the end of the day, it's really helpful when you all facilitate the neighborhoods in getting the job done. So that's my main commendation to everybody involved, and I thank you for taking that effort.
Actually, I was very impressed with, between when we originally saw it and now. I mean, at that time, there was still quite a bit in the draft.
Yes.
That there was question about being able to include it. And so when I read through this, you'd gotten rid of a lot of the things that you really have no control over.
Right.
And I was impressed to see that it had been brought down to a level that was easy to access and to go through. And I agree with the commissioner's statements about defining those things into letters and numbers and things like that, because it does make it easier to be able to refer to that.
Absolutely. Good.
And the only other comment I have is that I assume you're recommending approval on this?
We recommend approval, yes.
Okay, because you didn't say it, and I'm going, well, I think that's what he wants.
Yes, absolutely. Staff recommends approval.
So I was very impressed with how it had finally developed.
Jason?
No questions, just a comment commending staff on a lovely document and the design team and the neighbors for all the work that they put into this. It provides great examples throughout using the historic catalogs and color swatches and showing examples of what is desired for the character of the district. So
good.
Thank you.
Good. And again, a lot of that credit goes to the neighbors. Matt provided a lot of the photographs of the garages. There was the neighbors who pushed for the color swatches. So it was that kind of expansion has been really, really useful for us. So very helpful.
Okay. My questions are brief and brief answers. Houses with enclosed front porches, and there's a few of them. I assume they're grandfathered in, or though Correct. You probably use the bully pulpit to open them back up again.
Correct. No.
Okay.
No.
When building codes are in conflict with guidelines, let's say building codes require a handrail when there's 3 or 4 more risers, and the guidelines say avoid because that's the historic open stairway. Who rules there, or do you strike a compromise with the building department?
Typically, it's a compromise, and if it's health, safety, welfare, it's definitely we follow the code. If it's something that has some flexibility to it, or there's some alternatives, we definitely look at those alternatives. That what's more appropriate for historic character. The key issue that I think Matt can talk about too is that we had, as you know, a hailstorm several years ago, and we had new roofs put in, and the inspectors, and we didn't catch it. It was our fault for not catching it. We had a lot of temporary inspectors too coming through just because there was so much work. But it was inspectors saying to come up to code, you have to have a lot more vents. You have to have a lot more access to that, that attic. And instead of saying what you can do, which is consistent with historic character, is a roof vent, along the peak of the roof, they end up pushing these additional vents. And so if the individual homeowners pushed back, they succeeded. But now I think we have a lot more guidance and some direction, and we're meeting with the inspectors on kind of a regular basis.
You spend a lot of time on venting, that's for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Visual from the outside.
Yep.
I just wanted to add one more thing to that. We also, the building codes, there are some building codes relative to if it's a designated historic property, and so that does allow more flexibility. We do have building codes that address that.
I see, okay. So maybe a little conflict resolution between
right, absolutely.
Some historic guy and some building department guy that's by the book.
Right, and one of the incentives is that there is some flexibility, as Jocelyn said, with the building code.
Okay. So. Let's see. I asked you about the garage demolition. Apparently it's allowed, but it requires obviously going through for the city.
You have to go through, the process, and it'd be difficult to do. We really encourage people to work with what they have and perhaps expand to the rear or whatever they can do to make it more useful, because a lot of the garages are too small. They were fortunate they ended up with some larger garages that were put in place, and they also had some garages that were built before it was a historic district, and so it's not as bad as it might be in terms of, garages that don't accommodate, larger cars. But we try and work with them to say, how do we make this work and still stay within the guidelines? So.
Okay. Let's see, requirements of property owners. I think it's, on the screen here, it's page 12. In the opening paragraph, you say certificate appropriateness. I think you left off the word certificate of appropriateness.
Oh, what page are you on, Mark? I'm sorry.
Page 12, requirements for property owners. Not sure if the numbers line up with a hard copy.
Okay, good.
About the fourth line, it says certificate appropriateness.
Yes, sure enough. Thank you.
Just add the word of, minor item.
Thank you very much.
Same page, owner of contributing buildings in historic districts are required to maintain. Let's say, for instance, you have an elderly couple, fixed income, don't have money, rafter tails start rotting. What do? Send in the police? What is the enforcement? And there's obviously can be conflicts.
Right. We really haven't had any over the years because the same provision applies to Main Street Historic District and anytime you have a landmark. And typically, that's the intent, and we try and work with property owners. We do have some financial incentives for people. There is a little small bit of a rebate for Littleton property taxes, which people do get. And there's some other things that we can offer. And for larger projects, there are the tax credits. Actually, it's a 20 to 25% tax credit. That's exceedingly, I think, beneficial to property owners. So there are some financial things. We don't enforce it, too hard, and it's really more in a situation like this. It's the neighbors working with each other, I think, as much as anything. When you have as cohesive a neighborhood as we have with Loudon, we've had one enforcement issue ever that I can think of in Main Street. It was before I was working on historic preservation, but there was one, and I think they came back and got a Main Street grant to actually do the work.
They did what?
I think they got a Main Street grant from the city to actually do that work. So, we try and work with people on that. So.
But we do it through code enforcement, so we have the mechanisms in place to work with people to make sure that they're meeting the code provisions. So Dennis is just saying that sometimes in this case, you can also apply for funding to do whatever you need to do if it's historic.
But let's say all else fails, and then you got an ornery owner and exposed rotting rafter tails is not a danger to the public. What do? What's the final authority, final action?
Yeah, well, we work through it, and we haven't had that situation, but you would need to eventually meet the code.
Someday.
The guidelines, yeah.
Last question, just out of curiosity, pop tops. You have one pop top in the neighborhood. Would you consider a pop top? Can somebody apply for a pop top in the Loudon district?
You can apply for a pop top, and typically when there is a request for a pop top in a historic area, we ask for any kind of addition to be the same height and go towards the back. That's the ideal. If you really want to go to a second story, we'd like it to be toward the rear of the house, so it doesn't really affect that front facade. Even the one that was in place, I think, has done a lot of work over the years to be more consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So,
okay. That's all the questions I have. Are there any other questions for staff? Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a discussion. Do we have a motion? Let's have a motion first. We have a choice of two that have been given to us, or maybe three. Let's have a motion, and we'll have a discussion.
Make a motion to approve. I don't have my computer on. The current resolution before us with the format changes discussed.
Okay. That's Robin's format changes?
All of them discussed, yeah.
Okay.
Seconded. I second.
Brian was second. Discussion?
Denise, did you capture all the edits, or Dennis, are you?
Between us, we can also go back and look at the tape. So,
just seeing no comment from anybody else, just a couple. Historic. Somebody mentioned historic context. Was a good addition. I agree. It was nice to see how it relates to 100 years ago. It does, I think this guidelines and standards conforms to the comp plan for Crop Progress Park. I do agree that the design guidelines were well crafted. I relished the chance of going in and finding mistakes as an architect, and I couldn't find any, other than a couple of minor things that I saw. Very good neighborhood involvement in this case. I thought that was well done. It took a long time, but I think it was worth. No longer allowed to speak, but yeah, good comment. And then lastly, our joint meeting with the Historic Preservation Board, I think it was in November, you said, to look at the rough draft was very instructive, and it really helped us in looking at the final draft. Any other comments before we vote? Seeing none, it's time to vote.
All right, the vote's unanimous and the motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, next item is public hearings, and we have no public hearings tonight. Comments and reports from staff?
No comments. Your next meeting on May 22nd will be a study session, and following that, it looks like in June, we do have a bunch of cases for you coming up as of this afternoon.
Bunch of cases?
3 or 4.
Oh, plethora, okay. Any commissioner comments? Seeing none, I'll join if Commissioner Graham would not complain about the shortness of the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Meeting is adjourned.